Hi all, welcome to today's lecture, and it's on cricket, the Canadian story, cricket and baseball, and lots on the plate today, and I hope to knock it out of the park. Okay, so there we go. There's going to be some overlap here with earlier lecture we had specifically about the money game. Okay, the switch to paid play. Yeah, and yeah, I hope to knock your White Sox right off. Okay, nothing to it but to do it. Let's get let's get into it. First off, you're thinking Cricket Canada. Why are we talking about that? And those two don't sound like they go together. And that raises this interesting historical problem that we don't think that. Why is cricket not a major pro sport in Canada? And the reason that is a historical problem is because it is a major sport in all other former British colonies. India, 100%. Pakistan, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, the West Indies. In Australia, you could argue it's number two. Australia rules football, gets a bigger audience, but cricket is considered Australia's national sport due to overall reach and relevance, and really strong followings for international matches and their national BBL, which is their Big Bash League. Cricket is in the top three in the UK, always with soccer and rugby, which completely makes sense. It originates in England in the 1500s, in the same era as mob football and well before rugby. Uh, Globally, cricket is the second most popular team sport, okay, after soccer. Now, that is assuming your definition of team sport doesn't include the Tour de France, because that would be second, but second or third. The International Cricket Council is the governing body. It has 110 nation members. And it hosts this World Cup every 4 years. Now, that World Cup gets 2.6 billion viewers, right? And this is where we get the stat that it is the second most followed sport in the world. Of course, India helps massively with the world's biggest population. There's a lot more than that World Cup game, which is the one-day game. There's also T20 cricket that happens every year. There's also Test cricket. Test cricket is a traditional game that lasts about 5 days. And the Test cricket competition is globally is every second year. Only 12 nations compete in that, and those are the 12 nations managed to make it into those rankings, and Canada is never there. Now that one gets about 130 million viewers, still decent, and that's about the same as the Super Bowl. And I have to say, it's cricket has had a resurgence in Canada of late, so it's definitely still here, and that resurgence has really happened with in tandem with multiculturalism, with immigration from India, especially. So, for example, we've qualified for a few of the last 5 World Cups, and we tend to rank near the bottom of the world's top 20 teams, and that's in the ODI, the one-day international, not, as I said, not in Test cricket. There's also 27 cricket fields or pitches in Toronto alone. That's not even the GTA. And as of 2025, there were 14 cricket pitches in Surrey, which is up from 5 in 2020. So yes, it's growing here in the West Coast also. But again, nowhere near the top sports in Canada, and nowhere near where it once was here in Canada. And so why is that? Well, first point before we get into the why, let's look at how big it was in Canada and in the States. And as with rowing, cycling, Canadians used to be very, very big on this sport that is now basically sidelined. And this goes way back. The Montreal Cricket Club was established in 1834. This is decades before the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association codifies the rules for all these sports, hockey, lacrosse, etc. In fact, the first international cricket match in the world, and you can look that up, first international cricket match globally, was played between Canada and the States, counterintuitively. And this happens in September 1944 in New York. And here, New York City. Canada wins by 23 runs in a low-scoring game that went on for 2 days in that first game. And it was a big one. There was a huge draw between 5,000, you can see here, between 5,000 and 20,000 spectators. Unclear how many exactly, but the estimates are that bets placed on this match range between 100 and 120,000. You can times that by about 33 for today. So millions were bet on this, many followers, and the prize was $1,000, so $33,000 for whatever team was going home with the cup. The following year, the U.S. played in Canada at McGill University, and then this became what was known as the Auty Cup. Okay, the Auty Cup Trophy Tournament that was named after the American engineer who's a cricket player who sponsored this cup. So this runs up to 1912, almost 70 years, okay? The Auty Cup. And it begins in a time when Canada doesn't yet exist, right? It's actually billed as United States of America versus the British Empire's Canadian province, that initial game. Yeah, that's worth remembering. Canada is not even a country yet, and these cricket clubs are growing, and interest is building, and this annual international tournament helps to give this patriotic rivalry to it, which is really so helpful to growing a fan base always. So cricket was really gaining a foothold, and in the Toronto area, it becomes very, very big. But it's also spreading out to the west with a nucleus of what would become clubs forming on the Pacific Coast in Victoria and also in Winnipeg. And the first sports match here on the West Coast was probably the cricket game played by the British Navy guys in Esquimalt in 1849. So very, very early. It's also played by the Royal Army Engineers in New Westminster not long after that. And it becomes a feature in Beacon Hill Park, Victoria, at the cricket pitch there, which is the original home of the Victoria Pioneers Cricket Club. Now today that field is still there, and it's an all-weather soccer field. There's also another cricket pitch there that still exists. There was an Oak Bay Club at the same time. There was a Cowichan Club in the later a part of the century. There was a Nanaimo Club, even older than Victoria's. And there was an Albion Club in Victoria that is still going, that started in 1891. And they're the ones that use the clubhouse that still exists in Beacon Hill Park. So yes, it was a big thing. And in fact, so big that in 1867, Johnny MacDonald declared that cricket was Canada's first official sport. 1867. Cricket is announced by Johnny MacDonald as our first official sport. A year and a half later, lacrosse would get the same title. So it's ambiguous. I guess more than one sport can get it. But in any case, not many people know that. But at this point, too, there's a cricket pitch behind Rideau Hall, which is the Governor General's house, okay, which must sound familiar to you because this is where Governor Lord Stanley would later build a rink. But yeah, so cricket big, but it peaks in Canada not long after MacDonald's proclamation. An interesting thing is the same thing happens in the United States. And in fact, a Canadian sports historian, Alan Metcalf, says definitively that cricket reached its heyday in the early 1860s. Okay, so historian David Cooper tried to explain Canada's unique story here vis-a-vis cricket, and he uses diffusion theory. Now, diffusion theory goes back to 1962. It's begun by some communications prof, and it's all about early adapters and innovators and late adapters and this kind of thing. Basically, it's trying to quantify the variables for why things diffuse or do not. And the four factors that Cooper lands on in diffusion theory are that he says explains why cricket didn't take off in Canada are these four here: the connection to nationalism, the role played by elite groups, cultural reasons for the emergence of other sports, and this factor of whether or not a sport is accepted by wider social groups, whether it's domesticated. Okay? Now, the wider reality to diffusion theory that we want to remind ourselves here before we start to unpack these 4 points and basically try and demolish all of them is that the wider context is British dominance. Okay, so British dominate modern forms of organized sports globally, right? They all emanated from England in a structured way, and they all did that in the latter half of the 19th century. So that's the overall diffusion, okay, from England to the rest of the world. And we know that here in Canada, it's the MAAA story, right? The Montreal Amateur Athletic Association, which diffuses all these sports to Canada. And yeah, this gets to the importance of sport in general, and cricket in particular, to the whole imperial dominance exerted by the British Empire at the time. Now, John Bale was an Australian sports geography historian. And yes, that's a thing, sports geography. And he argued already in the 1980s that the successful diffusion of sports within a society has usually been passed hierarchically from the higher levels of society to the lower levels. And we know that to be true of hockey, for example. Okay, so the broader model is everything's coming from England, and then within that is coming from the elite and trickling down. Okay? Yet, not all societies or cultures popularize or democratize the same sports in the same ways, and this is why Cooper is reaching for this theory to explain the decline of cricket. Okay, so nationalism, the first one. Okay, this seems to argue for cricket surviving, because in Canada, cricket was a widely played team sport in the 1800s. There's certainly lots of immigrants from Britain who wanted to play the sport. And let's remember that in English Canada, at least, nationalism is a British Canadian nationalism. It means identification with Canada's role in the British Empire. So cricket is a way of being both British and Canadian, a way of celebrating the British Empire and being part of it. And yeah, spreading imperial values. That's certainly what's happening in these early clubs, like the ones here in Victoria, BC, and loyalty to the empire, right? So that matters a lot. Okay, so then what's up? So here's the argument as per David Cooper. He says, unfortunately, Canadians didn't do well in international competitions. And he says that, between the 1840s and 1920, Canadian teams played 98 games against teams from other countries, including teams in the USA, and only 10 international wins in those 90 years. So a really low ratio. Okay, so they record 10 wins in 98 games. Okay, so not much to boast about here, not much fuel for Canadian nationalism, right? And in this, we were unlike the Australians, whose national team beat the English national team in 1882, a big moment. So the connection to nationalism was limited simply by doing poorly. That so argues David Cooper. Okay, so that's his first point here. Canucks didn't compete well. Okay, going on to his next point, the role of elite groups. Okay, there certainly was elite support for cricket in Canada. It was a gentleman's sport, but they don't diffuse it beyond themselves. And why? Well, Cooper says it's because they are rigidly pro-amateur. Okay, all gentlemen are pro-amateur, and therefore the Canadian cricket clubs remain these bastions of amateurism, and they do not encourage the money game. They do not encourage professionalism, right? Professionalization. Okay? So diffusion of the sport beyond an elite required accepting professionalism in order to bring the working class in, right, as things are changing, and this happens in all sports. So the rejection of professionalism is accompanied by this backward and romantic, ultimately romantic rejection of commercialism that doesn't bode well in the 20th century. So the cricket clubs did not market cricket successfully as a spectator sport, as a sponsored sport, as a paid sport, and it remained elite. Okay, so that second point that Cooper makes, okay, gentleman's sport remains elite. Disdain for professionalization. Okay, so the third point he gives us is cultural reasons for the emergence of other sports that competed with cricket. And here Cooper gives us this cultural reason that relates to industrialization and industrial time. Cricket was a pre-industrial sport in an industrial age, and in an age that's industrializing. The culture is changing, rural to urban industrial workers, farmers to cities. And it was pre-industrial in its use of time. A cricket test match is played over 5 days. And in the 19th century already, there were one-day matches, but they're spread out over 6 to 7 hours. Now, that time frame might have worked for prosperous independent gentlemen of leisure or students who go to boarding schools, but it's hardly going to fit with industrial time or appeal to an industrial working class. They did not have the time to do this, and other sports were shorter, so they take off. So there goes the third reason. And the final one is acceptance by wider social groups, which is kind of the same as point number 2, but not. So the point here is that Canada is very multicultural after World War I, especially in the West. We take in all these Galicians, Ukrainians, whatever. Canada becomes a mosaic for sure by the year of 1914 onward, especially. So no more shared national identity. Plus, we also have the founding problem that Canada is into the 20th century is 1/4 French, right? So cricket is not domesticated that because Canada is simply too multicultural. Canada is a mosaic. Other countries had more of a shared ethnic identity, more of a British Empire identity, and they stuck with cricket for that reason. Okay, so what do you think of these reasons so far? I would say that they are question begging. And in history, beware the question begging answer, the answer that just prompts the question why, right? And so let's look at them all in sequence and how we can demolish these 4 answers. And hopefully, or maybe your mind's gone there already. So let's look at them in turn. Okay. So first, the nationalism argument. It's just not persuasive, right? This poor win-loss record in international competition, you could say it's as much a symptom of a low level of participation as it is a cause, right? So how do you prove cause and effect there? And in other sports, Canadians competed very well, right? Like lacrosse, and yet that also was marginalized, didn't take off like hockey. Okay, so it also declined. So 2-part argument against that cause and effect problem, and that other sports have the same trajectory, even though we compete very well internationally. Okay, so then the argument that it's a gentleman's sport for an elite, is this persuasive? Well, it just begs the question, why didn't it remain elite in Australia? Cricket not only gets diffused from gentlemen's clubs, it spreads wildly, right? And becomes a very rowdy crowd participant riotous sport there, right? Anything but elite. Plus, there's plenty of evidence that people outside the elite actually did play cricket in Canada. And for example, researchers have tracked cricket players in Victoria into the property assessment records for the 1860s. This is what historians do. And if you don't enjoy that, don't go into this field. Archives, libraries, anyway. And they discovered that many cricket players own no property whatsoever. Okay, so they're not rich. And in fact, in 1869, the Victoria teams organized matches against some teams in San Francisco, but some of the Victoria players said they couldn't go because they couldn't afford the cost of the travel. Okay, so that argument doesn't hold water either. What about the one that cricket, the long cricket game, is incompatible with industrial time? That also logically is no answer at all. First, other industrializing countries saw diffusion of cricket, and secondly, the game can be shortened to accommodate industrial time, and India did that with the India Premier League. They restricted the time frame to a few hours by limiting games to a total of 40 overs. Okay, now each over is a set of 6 pitches in cricket. Though they don't call it pitching, they call it bowling. But in any case, time restrictions happen in cricket. They happen in all sports. They happen in lacrosse, obviously. So the same could have happened in cricket. And in fact, in the UK in the early 2000s, they invented T20 cricket, which is 20 overs, okay? So the games there last 100% about 3 hours each time. Okay, so this easily could have happened to cricket. And remember, sports are not fixed; they're not immutable; they evolve. So far, David Cooper's a 0 for 3. And then we get to our fourth reason, whether or not a sport is accepted by wider social groups. And he's saying, well, multiculturalism here, this mosaic means it didn't, that's why it didn't take off. Okay, and yeah, maybe. I mean, Canada has a unique French-English divide, but it is not uniquely multicultural. And other sports also cross social and ethnic divides. Okay, and so that one too seems to be a non-starter. In other words, all these four reasons can be said to be contributing factors, but individually none are really satisfying. Okay, uh, so you could say that the failure of cricket to diffuse correlates with all four, but isn't caused by them. And there's a big difference between correlation and causation. And as historians, we shouldn't get those confused ever. Causation, correlation, right? Uh, so yeah, and that's a lot of a lot of time spent demolishing an argument that you didn't even know existed. But in any case, I think it's really important and it's interesting because you don't want to be presentist and look to the past and say, well, this is why it happened, and we can explain it with these reasons. That becomes a kind of a fixed game when you do that, right? So don't confuse causation and correlation. And the answer for why cricket didn't take off or why it declined is much, much simpler, and it's in the title of this very lecture, and that is because baseball did. Okay, and so cricket didn't go away, but baseball is the game that takes over. So the real answer that we can give to the question about cricket is much simpler. Okay, and for that we have to look at the origins of baseball, its mass appeal in Canada, and especially to working class Canadians. And it needs being said, first of all, that Canadian workers have this alternative, and it's very like cricket, but by the way, not elite, and already way shorter on time commitment. And maybe most importantly, that cross-pollination is happening on both sides of the border, although that's happening in cricket as well. So here I am going in the falling in the same trap. But either way, by World War One, baseball is the most widely played and watched summer sport in Canada. Okay, so yeah, let's look at that. This is a sport that emerged in something like its modern form well before ice hockey. And there's this old American legend dating from the late 1800s that claims that it was an American invention. Okay, and that an American named Abner Doubleday invented baseball in 1839. Okay, so where does this legend come from? Well, it's because Americans need to prove that this is not derived from England, that it's independent. So this legend of the American genesis of baseball, invention of it, the Doubleday myth, is a pride thing. Okay. And I can quantify that because that this is a historical claim, defies not just a fact, but a basic rule of history that human creations and activities are always evolving, and sports do not get invented, they evolve over time. But in 1905, a commission is struck. This is how this myth takes hold, that it all begins here in 1839 in this game that was set up by Abner Doubleday. Okay? 1905, a commission is struck by Albert Spalding. Of course, you understand, or you recognize that name, Spalding. He's a manufacturer of sports equipment who owned the Chicago Cubs. And he handpicks 7 men to investigate the history of baseball. So he handpicks 7 men basically to invent a myth, to find what they want to find. Okay, and what they find is Abner Doubleday is in Cooperstown, New York, and in 1839. Which today is Cooperstown, New York. Today is the home of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That he invented the game. Okay? And that after that, Alexander Cartwright invents the New York game. And now that is accurate. The Knickerbocker rules, the game of baseball that we know it today, with 9 men on the field, with the 3 bases and a home plate. Basically, essentially the same rules we have to now is invented, codified that way by an Alexander Cartwright in the New York game in 1845. Okay, but the Abner Doubleday thing is a myth. Okay. And in fact, if you visit the Baseball Hall of Fame today in Cooperstown, they admit they've got this plaque labeled "Inventing Abner Doubleday." So they admit that this is a myth, that Doubleday didn't invent baseball. Baseball invented him. And in fact, the game evolved over centuries. Here is a 14th century French and Belgian manuscript that shows a ball and bat game played here by a group of nuns and monks. And as you can see, the nun at the left has caught the ball. Looks like the monk at bat has swung and missed and is turning around and arguing a call. Maybe, I don't know. There's two monks, there's two nuns in the infield that are raising their hands. So French nuns indeed played this game. But it doesn't advance very far because nuns are not allowed to get to first base. Definitely not second base. So the game was stymied in its infancy. So that's a bad joke. But how do you avoid it with nuns? It's a bad habit of mine. Sorry, too easy. Okay, too easy. Okay, so this is very early medieval era. There's also stool ball back then, and the first reference to that is in England in 1330. So varieties of what are called folk games. Stool ball is where the batter hits a ball, runs the bases, but if the pitcher knocks the stool over, the batter is out. No fun, none jokes there. Okay. Then you have another game called Rounders. This is also played for centuries, and the bases here are posts. Okay? You don't tag people out; you throw them out. In all these games, that's how it works. It's called plugging or soaking, where you hit the player with the ball. The runner is trying to dodge the ball, so it's got that added interesting element to it. Then, finally, in England in 1744, we get the first actual reference to what's called English baseball. And then we start seeing multiple mentions of that in the late 1700s, including, as was here in Canada. Okay, first recorded reference to baseball in North America is in a connection with a game here in British North America in 1792. Okay, 1792, the Duke of Kent is visiting Niagara, Upper Canada, and apparently Joseph Brant, the famous Joseph Brant of Brantford, and the Five Nations Reserve there in Brantford, his natives put on Mohawk put on a bat and ball game for the Duke of Kent. Following year, there's mention of a game happening in New Brunswick. So we know it's being played very early, late 1700s, and we know it's being played on the regular in the earliest years of the 1800s. And in fact, every year on June 4th, from 1803 onward, most towns in Ontario are having a baseball game. So why June 4? Well, good question. That is militia muster date. Okay, and if you know much about how militias work, prior to standing armies, every town, right, every man of fighting age has to muster once a year for militia date. And this was incredibly important after the War of 1812. The Upper Canadian government needs to know it has something approaching a force that could repel another invasion. So, and we're right back there today. So each year on June 4, military age men muster for training day. And basically you're just marching around for a couple of hours. You're probably not in great shape. You're celebrating King George III's birthday at the same time in the early 1800s. And so the date really doubles as an excuse to get drunk. That's really what it is. It's a party. And then all the townsmen will play a ball game afterwards. And this is what's going on when we get what some historians call our very first official game, which is played in Beachville in 1838. Right? We always have to have that first official game. And it's considered the first in that by many because it's the best documented ball game. It's got a recorded score, it's got named teams, it's got named players. And it happens in Beachville, which is just west of the town of Woodstock, Ontario, and a bit of a drive east of London, Ontario, if you know that area. But in any case, 1838, June the 4th, two local teams, and not incidentally, 1 year before Cooperstown, New York. Right? Now, the documentation for this is the mayor. He writes about it years later after he's moved out of the town. He became mayor and now he's living in Denver, Colorado. So he writes about this first game that he witnessed. The problem being, when he eyewitnessed it, he was only about 7 or 8 years old. Uh, but he gives all the names, and these names line up with real people, and the details all match. So the archives do match with what he's saying. Um, but yeah, some say that it's suspect, and this is another case of small town boosterism, and put our town on the map. And of course, boosterism is always the enemy of historical truth. But you know, it hardly matters since we know it's being played for decades by then. And yeah, don't discount the possibility that somebody will find an earlier game as well. And maybe one that's just as documented as the Beachville one in some dusty archive someday. But again, not that it matters. What's recorded is something that is happening for a while in Ontario. And another point, it's the Canadian rules game. Very different game than today's rules. And if you look at that image I captured here from a documentary about it that you can find online quite easily, the infield is almost square. Except that the first base is at a 95-degree angle from home, just off 90-degree angle from home, with a very short run to first, okay? 18 feet long. And the idea here is make it easy to get that runner to base before trying to plug and hit that runner. Okay? Also means very high scoring games. 40 runs is not uncommon. You have 5 bases, they're called byes. And again, you're plugging. You hit the runner with the ball, he's out, so you got that added dimension to it. But it also means it's a very soft ball. Pitchers are also much closer to the plate. They have to throw underhand, and they have to follow the directions of the hitter, his preference for high or low. Interesting. And fielders don't have gloves. Earliest games, like in cricket, also have a 360-degree playing surface, so you can hit the ball anywhere you wanted. You don't have the 90-degree field that we know today with out of bounds. Okay? So if you want to get more on this, the big name there is William Humber. He's the main historian of Canadian baseball, and he has a recent book from 2024, and you can order that from the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, which not incidentally, not very far from Beachville. It's in St. Mary's, a short 20-minute, half-hour drive from Beachville, Ontario. Okay, games similar to this appear elsewhere in Upper Canada between the 1830s and the 1860s, and also in the Maritime provinces. And usually in these games, there's 11 players. There's another variation of this called town ball, which is a word also used in Canada and the United States. In any case, then finally, this variant of the game appears in some places. And this is what I talked about before. It's called the New York game. This comes from the States, and it is what we think of as baseball today. 4 bases, 9 players, 3 strikes for an out. And the first team to play under these rules, as I said before, is the New York Knickerbockers. This is a club organized by Alexander Cartwright. And so these rules are also called the Knickerbocker rules. Now, knickerbockers are the short pants worn by baseball players. Also by basketball players in New York Knicks, that name derives from Knickerbocker. But yeah, really the first formally organized team in Canada is in Hamilton, 1854, organized by young William Shuttleworth, who's only 20 at the time, and the Hamilton Young Canadians. And they play the New York game. Okay, so a big moment there, 1854, New York game and the first formally organized team, Shuttleworth. And they also have an executive, they have a membership fee, it's quite low, and they have a regular place to play. Now, from the beginning, this sport is mostly working class guys, okay? And so historians have documented exactly who was on the team and what they did by occupation. And there were a few clerks, there were a couple coach makers, a saloon keeper, a guy who did house painting, a marble cutter, a brakeman, a tinsmith, broom maker, cigar maker, watchmaker. Simple, not high-end, not highly skilled workers. Okay, and that's important because it tells us that baseball, from the beginning, is really beyond the control of elite interests. It's not the affluent property of middle classes as is in many sports. It's not a gentleman's sport. Okay? So consistent with its folk roots, and by the 1860s. Shuttleworth's team is playing other towns in Ontario, and they're playing for what is called the silver ball. Okay, now the town of Woodstock initiates the silver ball, sets up its own competition for it, and then there's a challenge prize. So it's this annual prize that's begun by Woodstock for the silver ball, a challenge cup, really what it is, and Shuttleworth gets to a point, so there's a bunch of teams playing, and they're all playing by the New York rules. He gets to a point where he tries to set up a national association. He calls it a national organization, but that really doesn't go very far. And it's not national anyway. It's only southwestern Ontario that's really playing it here, in this way with the New York rules. Now, more information than you want or need. Woodstock dominates in the 1860s, and then Guelph takes over. Okay, so let's look at Guelph, because that's where baseball goes next, and this is super important. And this is where we introduce you to George Sleeman, okay, and professionalism. Okay. Businessman George Sleeman gets involved in baseball. Now Sleeman, and you recognize the name, Sleeman's Beer, that's him. He starts the Sleeman Brewery in Guelph. And he's a classic small town booster, city promoter. He co-founds the local opera house. He brought the provincial fair to Guelph. He becomes mayor for 6 years. And then he decides, hey, you know what? Baseball can help promote both the city and my bottom line. It could help sell my beer. So really early shades of what becomes a pattern, or what Labatt's would do 110 years later with the Toronto Blue Jays. He gets himself in control of the local ball club. And it's called the Guelph Maple Leafs, which just began a few years before. Again, New York rules. And it's a solid group of local players. He calls them the Homebrews. And he does two really consequential things. One is Sleeman sets up a league. Okay, a league, an actual formal league, a 5-team league of the best teams in Southern Ontario. He calls that the Canadian Association of Baseball Players. So you see from the name again, as we saw with Shuttleworth, they're making the pretense that it's a national league, and in fact, it's all these teams within a couple hundred miles radius of Southern Ontario. And they're places like London, Woodstock, Ingersoll, small town, right? But they get larger crowds with this league, and they get increased coverage in the press, intercity rivalries. A league is a brilliant way to grow the game, and we've seen the same in hockey. Now, this happens at the same time, interestingly, that the first National League is being organized in the United States. Okay? Exact same time period, same year, and that one gets commissioned the following year. Second thing he does that's super consequential, is to raise their profile on winnability. He then recruits 2 American ball players, and he pays them to play. Okay? Professional ballists, as they're called. And one of them, his name is Bud Fowler, and he's documented as the first black person to play professional baseball, which he'd been doing since he was 14 years old in the States, and various teams in Canada and the States in his career. Now, this payment idea, this is a full 30 years before the big fight over paid play in Canada, and it's 60 years before the Canadian Amateur Athletic Union loses that fight. But we also know that this is a time when it's becoming common in hockey as well, right? You know that. So in any case, other teams follow suit because, right, if somebody does it, you have no choice, you have to pay as well. But a key point is they're not doing this openly. Okay, so Sleeman is still pretending he has an amateur team. But clearly no pro player is coming all the way from the States to play for the honor of boosting your town, some town like Guelph or Woodstock, right? So what they would do is they would give them some local job or some job title so that they can pay them under the table. Now, and it works. What Sleeman does, his promotion, it gets the crowds out. It also helps that railroads have extended to all these towns by then. And the newspapers of the period say that 10,000 people would come out for championship games. Now, historians fact check that, and they say it's probably about half that. So even so, those are big numbers. And yeah, it works great for Sleeman. His team takes top spot in the new league, and he took his team on tour. In 1886, the Maple Leafs went on a 54-game tour of Canada and the United States, mostly the States. Huge success. Okay? They win 47 out of 54 games, including against the Ku Klux Klan Club of Oneida, New York. But in any case, this puts Guelph on the map. And what we learned from this, too, their winning streak is that the Canadian game is as good or better than the American at the time. At that time, Sleeman is an amazing promoter, with a really big legacy for sports in this country. He dies in 1926. This is the 10th year of Prohibition, which had effectively killed most of his brewery business. Okay? Although, as you know, it does come back. Now, it's not just men's teams, and it's not just whites that are playing. We get a women's team forming in Guelph in 1872, and the Guelph YWCA will add a second women's team there eventually. And by the early 20th century, most YWCAs have women's teams, so other towns are getting the same. First Nations are playing as well. The Tuscaroras, as a team from the Mohawk Six Nations out by Brantford, they start playing in the 1870s. So yeah, everybody's playing the game. The first black team is the Lincoln Nine in London, Ontario, and there's enough black baseball teams in Southern Ontario that we have our first all black tournament. They called it colored teams back then, and that happens in 1869. Now this is a reflection of the fact that they are also not invited to play in white team tournaments. The Tuscaroras, though, the First Nations were, which is interesting, that dichotomy. But in any case, colored baseball teams will last through the 1930s. 19th century too is when we have pretty much every certain size industry. If you're of a certain size, you will field a ball team. Okay, so here we have a quote from Brian Palmer, who's a big name in labor history in Canada. An older book of his, Culture and Conflict: Skilled Workers, Industrial Capitalism in Hamilton, and he talks about how all these different businesses are fielding baseball teams. Right? And then he gives some idea of their scores. He says, "A raucous affairs punctuated with much merriment." Again, this is very much a working class sport. Now, broader picture, the same year that Canada establishes its first league, the United States does the same. And that's the National League, which forms in 1876. National League is a 6-team league initially. It's co-founded by Albert Spalding again, and the owner of the team he's just signed with as pitcher in his very last year playing. And that's his Chicago team, which is then called the White Stockings. And the owner is one William Halbert. He's a retailer, owns a grocery chain. Anyway, this is what becomes today's major league. By the early 20th century, when it merges with the American League. Doesn't really merge, but when it forms an association with the American League. And at which point they simply call themselves the Major League, though that term doesn't really enter common parlance, common usage till much later, till decades later. But they call themselves the Major League. Other leagues are minor, and that system is starting to develop. They also arrogantly call their championship the World Series, which hardly the case. The Twin Leagues then had 16 teams, and every single one of them was east of the Mississippi and north of the Mason-Dixon line, all of them clustered in the northeast of the United States. Now, interestingly, there are no Canadian teams in the National League at the outset, but there almost was. And the London, Ontario team, the Tecumsehs, which had been in Sleeman's league, they're invited by Spalding and Herbert to join them. And after meetings with them, their manager declined the invitation. And the main reason was because they wouldn't agree to also take Sleeman's Guelph team, which is Woodstock's main rival and healthy for that regional local competition. So instead, Woodstock's manager decides after 1 year being in Sleeman's League to join the International League that starts in 1877 in the U.S. And this is a competitor of the National League. Okay? There are 5 U.S. teams, 2 in Canada. London joins, as does Guelph. So now Sleeman's team is in this new international league, which is vying for contention to become the big league in North America. So, yeah. And guess who wins the first championship here? It's London's Tecumsehs. They defeat the New York Alleghenies. Now, again, all this speaks to the high level of ball on both sides of the border, and it's just happenstance that a Canadian team was not on the ground floor of what becomes Major League Baseball. And what's fascinating is that this is exactly 100 years before an Ontario team will join the major leagues. Meantime, what about the old Canadian game that was played in Beachville, the 5 bases and whatnot? Well, unlike football, we don't keep our game. We don't keep those rules, and uh, that game fades in the 1870s as all of this is happening, and it's basically almost completely gone by the 1880s. We completely folded into the New York rules game. And why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. Baseball has a north-south orientation. People in the Maritimes are Boston Red Sox fans. Maritime teams play in New England. Ontario teams play in New York. And people in the West Coast will follow teams in the Pacific Northwest. So when baseball comes to the coast, Victoria and Vancouver, the first teams here, we're not playing across Canada. We're playing down the coast in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And yeah, having landed on one set of rules, baseball is now growing everywhere. So baseball really coming to its own by about the year 1900, by the turn of the century. You got big support from business, from factories, banks and unions have teams. It's growing everywhere in Canada. And second only to hockey in some regions, to lacrosse and hockey in others. So it's up there. And in some areas, it goes way back. St. John's, which I haven't talked about, Newfoundland First Baseball Club is 1853. First club in Halifax, 1868. Winnipeg, it comes early in the 20th century. Baseball, quite a bit later to take hold in the West. Small towns throughout the prairies have amateur teams by World War I, invariably, and it becomes a pretty big thing, big part of Canadian culture. Lots written about that. But not as early as Ontario, and definitely not on the coast either, right? Pro baseball starts in Victoria in 1893. Before that, there is amateur ball, but that is when pro baseball begins here on the coast, 1893, quite a bit later. Short-lived new Pacific League is what that was in Victoria, and as I said earlier, we're playing down the coast. So Victoria, that first league was Victoria, Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland. So a circuit that lasted just one season, perhaps overly ambitious in the travel side. 1911, there's a Northwestern League that starts up in Victoria. Again, a second effort in that direction. There's a bunch more over the decades. Pro ball begins in Vancouver in 1905, and that's with the grand opening of Recreation Park, which was such a big deal. This is designated as a civic holiday. There's a parade, and the whole city has a vacation that day, municipal vacation. The home team here in the Recreation Park was the Vancouver Veterans, and in that home opener, they beat the Victoria Legislators. Terrible name, 4-2. You had 3,500 fans here paying 25-cent entry fee. This is also where Con Jones's lacrosse team would initially play before he built his own stadium, and lacrosse quickly becoming a big contender for baseball. Another notable team in BC history is the all-Japanese Vancouver Asahi, and baseball very big with the Japanese, and there's a big population of Japanese in the Powell Street area of Vancouver then. 1914 is their first season, and they're quickly famous for a brand of baseball that then is called brain ball, which means they're just smart at it. They stole bases a lot, and they dropped these deadly accurate bunts, and a very smart, intelligent style of play. They win the Pacific Northwest Championship many times, and then 5 years in a row, starting in 1937, many times before that, but 5 years in a row, starting in 1937, the Northwest Championship, which is the league of that time. However, as you probably anticipate, 1941 is going to be their last great summer because, and the last time they play as a team, because early 1942, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, all Japanese people are interned 100 miles from the coast, and their property is confiscated to pay for their maintenance while in exile from the coast for security reasons, as you know. As a team, the Asahi would never play again together, but these guys, along with thousands of Japanese Canadians, really took the spirit of baseball with them wherever they were dispersed to, and these former Asahi players assembled baseball teams. That's been documented. And so these guys are playing against their RCMP prison guards. They're playing with local townspeople, a lot of whom had never seen a Japanese person before, and they're completely surprised to figure out that they speak perfect English. And so it's interesting, right? Baseball, this ultimate symbol of North American culture, really of what American culture is today, was this common bond between whites and Japanese, and yeah, one would hope that helped dispel fears that had led to this evacuation in the first place, and we know that it led to lasting friendships that still exist to this very day. So yeah, and that's, I guess, a positive spin on a very, very negative story. But yeah, baseball, regional in Canada and not across Canada. Okay, so again, in BC, it's down the coast, just as it is in Ontario, down in New York, and the Maritimes, down into New England. Same time baseball was big in Ontario, it was also massive in Quebec, and specifically in Montreal. Montreal has this team, the Royals, that goes back to the 1890s. Very famous team in Canadian history, and owned at one point by the grandfather of Justin Trudeau, the father of Pierre Trudeau. Now, it is as of the 1930s, it is the top AAA affiliate of the Brooklyn Dodgers, and it remains that from 1939 to 1960 when it folded. So if you're not aware, affiliates are minor league teams with player development contracts with their major league counterparts. Okay, and in baseball, there's 4 tiers of minor league affiliates. AAA is at the top. Until 1946, there were 6 tiers, and it's an amazingly complex system. But the very next year, the Montreal Royals get Jackie Robinson. So the very year after they go to the 4-tier system that we have to this day, the Montreal Royals get Jackie Robinson. And this is one of the biggest moments in North American sports history. And in fact, the Royals become the first integrated baseball team in the major league system. So Montreal becomes the first integrated baseball team in the major league system. And this is a really big moment. And perhaps you've watched the movie 42 with Harrison Ford. Not a great movie, got to say. But yeah, it does give you, you won't forget it. But and maybe you know the story at least to some extent. And it's a story of the Dodgers general manager, Branch Rickey, who had agreed to grow a pair and sign a black player and break this white only color bar, in spite of the fact he knows that if it's going to be real, there's going to be hell to pay whenever they play in south of Dixie, right? Which is really a massive regional support for baseball in the South. It's a very big deal, and those fans will not tolerate integration. Any case, he signs Jackie Robinson anyway, and then he wants to test him out in Montreal in their farm team because he knows that city has a reputation for racial tolerance. He thought it would provide a calmer environment to test the waters, see if a black player could play in a pro league. Needless to say, he did. He did very well, and he wins the MVP award that year. And the fans in Montreal absolutely adore him. In fact, at one point, this is a famous moment where they chase him from the field to the train station, and he famously quipped, and that's why the moment is recorded, or becomes this infamous thing. It's the first time he says that a white crowd was chasing a black man, not to lynch him, but out of love. This is a paraphrase. Any case, yeah, in 1947, big deal. It marks a definitive shift in baseball, and everyone else eventually follows suit. Also, Robinson's first home run in Montreal is, according to comedian Shane Gillis, look that up, you'll be glad you did. It's the last time white people were cool, okay? All I need to tell you on that one, but yeah, look that up on YouTube. Now, the backstory of racial exclusion is that initially teams in Canada and the northern states were integrated in the 19th century. And we saw that with the first paid players for George Sleeman. One of those was Bud Fowler, the first black person to play professional baseball in North America. So this is 1870s. And there's a few more between him and Charlie Galloway, who is the first Canadian of color signed to a Woodstock team in 1899. Okay. Now, after that in Canada, there's this unwritten gentleman's agreement not to play against teams with black players, which is keeping in step. It's simply following in line with a more formalized practice that began in the U.S. leagues in 1887 when one U.S. league decided to voted not to assign any black players, and the other leagues followed step. And with white-led teams no longer signing players of color, we get the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues was the only option for those who wanted to play. In any case, Jackie Robinson later said these years in Montreal were the happiest of his life. Now, a couple interesting things happen with the integration of baseball and with the success of the Jackie Robinson experiment in Montreal as Major League is integrated. One thing is that the colored leagues start to disappear. There's no more need for them. So in the post-World War II period, precisely because of the success of Jackie Robinson, a Major League ball now takes African American players, and the best players will get in there. Now, the second thing that happens is rural Canada benefits enormously from the demise of these Negro leagues south of the border because of the availability of their players now, many of whom came to Canada. And in fact, as Bruce Chadwick says this in his book, When the Game Was Black and White, he says the only place for Negro Leaguers to go was Latin America, Mexico, or Canada. And they do. And these years are really a golden age for baseball here, right? Where different things come together, including a lot of colored players. And that's kind of the 1940s to the early or mid 60s, I would say, is the golden age of the Canadian semi-pro leagues. This is when you have whole scads of homegrown regional leagues all over the country. And these are semi-pro teams. Most players are not making much; they have to work other jobs, but the teams could pay quite well. And I'll give you an example. One, Chet Brewer. He's a first baseman from Kansas. Brewer has this fascinating story. He played in 44 states. In 8 different countries over 4 decades, from the 1920s to the 1950s, and then after he retires from the game, becomes a scout for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But yeah, he's in Saskatchewan in the 1950s. He's making $450 a month playing first base for the Scepters, okay? The Saskatchewan Scepters baseball team. Then halfway through the season, he gets bought for $800. He's paid $800 mid-season to jump ship and play for the Indian Head Rockets, and also in Saskatchewan. And so, and to put that in perspective, this is a time when a night in a hotel was $1. Okay, so he's making good money. Now, the weirdest of things is the Scepters, who bought him, are a team in this little village you've never heard of 200 people. Okay? But they are a powerhouse in the Western Canada Championships, which is just this real oddity of prairie baseball. It shows that the level of support this game is getting, that a small rural population can keep a team going. And it's not just the 200 people in town, it's farmers in the surrounding area, right? And they're paying for top talent, and they're getting it. If you want to do a deep dive into this, there's a fantastic website on this whole era. It's called attheplate.com. That top left picture there is from there, and it's got pictures, stories, rosters, and it gets bigger all the time. It's really a strong archive especially for the prairies and BC. But there's also stuff on the colored teams that predate this. There's also stuff in the Maritimes, Ontario, and Quebec. And the great thing about it, a lot of players' recollections in here as well, and pictures you can't find anywhere else. So yeah, you'll get the inside deets on teams like Nakusp, which played in Kootenay's Arrow Lakes League, which I'm sure you've never heard of. The Arrow Lakes League ran from 1931 to the early 1960s, and it had Japanese players, names like Hoshikazaki and Yanagisawa and Barin Yashido. Which again makes that point that the Japanese spread this game to interior towns in British Columbia, and they settled there after the war. In fact, they weren't allowed to return to the coast. And they're playing alongside guys with white bread names like Neil Shaw, Rob Hale, right, or German Mennonite names like Steenhoff. And then there's teams like the Lloydminster Meridians in what was called the Western Canada League, completely another fairly big league for its time, with about 6 or 9 teams. I can't recall. Curly Williams is their all-star player. He comes up from South Carolina, and he came up from the colored teams there. There's teams like the Carman Cardinals in Manitoba, the Brandon Grays, and they're both in the Mandak League, which is this long defunct Manitoba North Dakota League. teams from both sides of the border. But as I said, I'm just giving you a snapshot here. There's a lot there. It's a real golden age of small town ball. And if you want kind of a subjective sense of that and a comical and a really beautiful rendering of that, read W.P. Kinsella. Okay, so W.P. Kinsella is a Canadian author who wrote the book Shoeless Joe, which then became the movie Field of Dreams. Okay, now Field of Dreams is set in Iowa, but his novel, Box Socials, another one of his, is set in rural Alberta, and yeah, he's got a few other books as well in the ball game and on small Canadian towns, and it's all really great stuff and all very comical, so highly recommended. Now, a golden age is only golden because it no longer is, so you're looking at it from the perspective of decline, and the demise of the smaller pro leagues happens, and that the semi-pro leagues, sorry, and that begins in the United States. And it happens there largely because radio and then television start carrying major league games. Okay, simple as that. At that point, people didn't have to drive to the local high school. They could watch high-level ball at home, or they could drive to the nearest big city and take it in there. And there are 24 teams in the Major League Ball system in the United States by 1969, so there's a lot. They're everywhere. Initially, at least, radio, newspapers, and television is not as much a threat to the fans on this side of the border. Okay, so the decline is a bit later on the Canadian side, and Canadian fans could follow both. They'd follow their local teams as well as American Major League Ball franchises. The difference being, of course, because Canadian cities didn't have the Major League game, so you know your local scepters aren't competing for those dollars. It's a little town of 200 people. But the golden age does decline in Canada too, especially in rural Canada in the 1960s. And why is that? Well, there's a few things going on, but a big one being just decline in Canada's rural population in general, right? There's a big depopulation of rural areas in Canada at that time, a long one that continues. And what you get instead, and this is particularly in the West, what you see instead taking its place is major league affiliates in the bigger Canadian cities. So what we get is fewer teams with bigger fan bases. So for example, you'll have your AAA teams playing at one point in Edmonton, in Calgary, in Vancouver, and in Winnipeg. These are all affiliates of major league teams in the United States at one point. The only one left as of 2026 was Vancouver, the Vancouver Canadians being the lone MLB affiliate by 2026. And they're an affiliate of the Blue Jays, and they play in the Nat Bailey Stadium, which has a long history to it in the lacrosse world before, and that's near Queen Elizabeth Park, Vancouver. Only one professional independent league survived to pass the 1960s in Canada and kept going, and that is in Ontario. It is the Inter-County Baseball League of Ontario. Okay? Now this began in 1919 and it is still going today. It was rebranded in 2025 as the CBL, the Canadian Baseball League, which is safe to do because it's really the only one left. So they can call themselves Canadian, even though again, like we've seen before, there are 9 teams. Basically, it's a reiteration of what Sleeman had done in the 1870s. It's that same network. But yeah, today it is the longest running continuously operated baseball league, one of them in the world. It might be the longest in the world. Longest running continuously operated semi-pro baseball league. If you put enough adjectives in, you're always going to win that game. But in any case, but yeah, it's basically a successor league to the one that George Sleeman began in the 1870s with most of the same small towns. Well, not small anymore, most of the same towns. Quebec's provincial league, like most of those on the prairies, it folded in 1971. There is no independent ball league in the Maritimes anymore since the Can-Am League there, cross-border league, folded in 2019. Meantime, the Montreal Royals, which had been this AAA affiliate of the Brooklyn Dodgers, they get relocated in 1960 to New York, Syracuse of all insulting relocations. It's not finances, but which is a key part of the reason that here, unlike these other small centers where that's the end, in Montreal there's an immediate push to get a new team. And this time not just an affiliate, but to go one up and get a major league team. So, and it works. The Expos come in 1969, a very, very big moment. This is part of a wider story. It's part of a 4-team expansion for the 1969 season. But for Canadians, yeah, this is the first Major League Baseball team in Canada. Now, a wider context, this is coming on the heels of Expo 67, which is a kind of marked Montreal as an international city. That Expo went very, very well, and it's a big deal. And it also shows that Montreal can host big international events. And has the confidence, the wherewithal to host Major League Ball. It also is a credit to John Drapeau, the mayor, who a controversial guy, but he gets on board and stick handles this. I guess bad handles it. Sorry. But more so Charles Bronfman. Okay, and you probably recognize the name. This is the old time liquor family who made their fortune during Prohibition, which is kind of interesting because Prohibition ruined people like Sleeman. But for Quebec distillers, and perhaps you've heard of this, the Prohibition years, especially in the United States, were a godsend. Quebec Prohibition didn't last more than 5 minutes. Well, no, it lasted very, very shortly at the provincial level, less than any other province. They like their hooch in Quebec, but more so they get in on the smuggling trade, and that's what made the Bronfmans so fabulously wealthy. In any case, he's leading the ownership group that secured the franchise. Now, unfortunately, after 36 years, the Expos, and some great years, the Expos get into challenges on the resource side and declining fan base, and they end up folding in 2005. Now, this is a combination of things, and the big debate is whether it was inevitable or not. But it's poor ownership, failure to make a profit in the end, and also this complicated chronic issue with their ballpark and the failure to raise enough money to build a new one, which they desperately needed because of the white elephant that was their venue, which is the Olympic Stadium, which had never been built as a ball stadium, for one. So fans are sitting way too far out, bad sight lines. It's bad turf. It's also never finished. And in some ways actually kind of dangerous because there are points where concrete actually falls off the roof. It's a scandal, that stadium. But in any case, Major League Baseball owners end up taking over the team and ultimately moving it to Washington, D.C. as the Nationals in 2005. In the same year that they plan to fold the Minnesota Twins team. There's a story for why that doesn't happen. They get back on their feet. Minnesota, there's a lawsuit, but yeah, they're trying to get faltering teams off the books. And the backstory here involves Montreal's owner at that point, recent owner Jeffrey Loria. Okay, he can politely be described as I'm not going to say it. Anyway, he takes over in 1999. He's a New York art dealer, and he gets majority ownership real quick. And he's a disaster. He's a train wreck. He can't get a deal on a new playing field, not even a temporary one, because he's a bad negotiator and expected the province to pay for a new stadium, which they won't. He also can't negotiate a deal on English media rights. He wants way too much money, so he ends up losing English language television and radio, loses half his fans right there. He essentially starves the team of resources, and some say that it was intentional so that he would devalue it to the point that it would be bought out by the major league owners, and that he could move the team then to the States, which is what ends up happening. Laurier, meanwhile, uses the $120 million he gets from the Major League Baseball, a lot more than he put into it, to buy the Florida Marlins, and then he goes on to make more enemies down in Florida. He's been called a lot of things. One of them is, quote, baseball's most hated man, unquote. Its worst owner, and even, quote, the worst owner, one of the worst owners in sports history. I think that was Rolling Stone. In any case, Loria is definitely not welcome back in Montreal. Meantime, Blue Jays, okay, Toronto secures a franchise in 1977. Now, Toronto had long wanted a major league, and in fact, it had been considered as early as the 1880s for getting one, but it never did, and that's a whole other story too, why that never happened. In the 70s, there is a high-level talk of the San Francisco Giants moving to Toronto. Now that gets stopped by a court order, but then in 1977, Toronto was finally awarded an expansion franchise, and same year that Seattle is as well. So not a relocation team, an expansion franchise. And in Toronto, it's a group of 3 investors that pay $7 million to enter the league. So unbelievably cheap compared to what it's valued today. 50% ownership then is Labatt's Blue. So this is consistent with what we see in the 100 years before, right? Brewery, Sleeman's, and promotion for your product. Now, first day of opening day for the Blue Jays on their home field, home game, it snows. Okay, and it turns out their first stadium is not super suitable either. It's the Argos playing field. Okay, it's Toronto's exhibition stadium. Temperature was 0, snow's falling, it's wet snow, and the water didn't drain off the field. And there's even talk, ironically, of getting a Zamboni to water off the field, to get the water off the field. That doesn't happen. So that's an issue from the get-go, as is the fact there's no beer and the fans are yelling that they wanted beer, and they would get both. They'd get a covered stadium and they'd get beer before too long. And as you may know, they'd also get the World Series. So the Jays took the World Series back to back in 1992 and 1993, first time that had been done in about 15 years. And I will never forget Game 6 in 1993, and how nerve-wracking that was, to the point where I actually had to leave the house, stop watching on TV, I got in my old Buick and drove around town listening to it on the radio, which makes no sense at all. In any case, it ends with Joe Carter's now famous Sky Dome shot, which was the second homer ever to put an end to a World Series, to win a World Series. First being, I think, in 1960. And of course, unless you were on Mars in 2025, you know that they almost repeated that. And you remember that suddenly everyone seems to be a baseball fan again. Okay. Now with that, we can just cap this lecture with the themes that took us into the 21st century. And I'll close the lecture with that. And one of my recap points is, baseball has deeper historical roots than hockey. And at one point was far more popular. So it's one thing you should get out of this lecture. It's much deeper historical roots than hockey. At one point was much more popular. But as the big league game took over with consolidation and folding of the semi-pros and with urbanization, it really lost its hardcore fan base, right? Especially in rural Canada. And at the major league universe, we don't compete, unfortunately. Right, so as it moves to the cities, we don't compete, and we don't have, as the semi-pros die, we don't have enough market for many major league teams. And you can compare Canada to California. California has a similar population, about 40 million. It has 5 major league teams. We have 1. And so why is that? Well, California is baseball obsessed, but it also speaks to geographic concentration. Right, compared to Canada, obviously Cali is very small and it's crowded, and you need a big local population to support baseball, in particular baseball, because you have 81 home games a season. Okay? And in Canada, you're competing with the NHL, so overlap is a real issue, as it is in any city. Right, and that's especially true in what's called the sports equinox, which usually is late October, when all 4 of the major North American professional leagues are actively are playing, and they're actually chasing the same dollars at the same time. Plus, and this is a really big one I haven't mentioned yet, players are paid in U.S. dollars, right? And they're paid many U.S. dollars. Okay, so. And that exchange rate really is a big factor. And if it was reversed, think about if American teams, franchises had to pay a 30 to 40% premium or penalty, you might call it. Many of them would probably be on the hooks. So it definitely was a major factor for the Expos as well. You can't blame it all on Laura, even though it is fun to. Anyway, because of all this, in Canada, you get what we call the Blue Jays bump, the Blue Jays bump phenom, where really there's not that much interest nationally in baseball until the Blue Jays become contenders. And then suddenly there's a whole lot. everyone's talking baseball. And about 40% of Canadians followed them very closely in 2025 as they made it to the World Series. And then the talk becomes of the Jays being Canada's national team. That's certainly how they like to market themselves, right? And a lot of Canadians agree. Not all of them, in fact, were evenly split. There were surveys done in 2025, and half of Canadians say they agreed that the Blue Jays are the national team. And in some ways, it seems you can argue that they are, because their games in Seattle will see a huge Canadian turnout from the Lower Mainland. So in that sense, they're West and East, okay, in terms of fan support. But yeah, the gap years speaks to the fact that baseball has lost its place here in Canada, right? And maybe this explains why Canadians were really stung when this American commentator in 2025 questioned Canadian baseball fans' IQ when we were in the World Series against LA, so our baseball IQ. And this probably stung because there's definitely something to that. Canadians are no longer used to watching baseball in general. And when we do, it's such a different experience than what those who are used to watching hockey are seeing, right? It's definitely not a fast game, that is for certain. Completely different feel. And from first blush, you look at the athletes, and they simply do not look like what you expect, right? And they look like they're pushing middle age. And this speaks to the fact that baseball really is an individual skills game, right? About power hitting, good hitting average, running, fielding, and throwing. And it's very, very unusual to have that five-tool player. So yeah, they don't look like, compared to hockey players, they look like they're past their prime. And yet they are professional athletes playing a very high-level game. Nature of the game, though, also explains why they can have 160 plus game season, and because it is nowhere near as intense as hockey. And there's this famous ESPN sports skills difficulty study, and it ranked hockey as the second toughest sport in the world, right? First being boxing. Okay, so right under boxing. Baseball ranked 9th, and I believe that was out of 10th. Okay, so yeah. Any case, it is slow. It's much faster now with recent rule changes. It's down to average 2.5 hours. Still not short, but much better. As a kid watching Blue Jays games, which I frequently did, it was an afternoon commitment, and it is slow. Like with football, that 2.5 hours can be compressed to under 20 minutes of actual playing time. So all to say, really, it is acquired passion. It's completely different, especially for those who are used to hockey. And when it's gone, when the semi-pro leagues are gone, it's not something we're generally watching. And so you get that Blue Jays bump and this talk of the baseball IQ of Canadians. Last point. Compared to mid-century, we are not well set up to get back to where we once were. And this gets to the fact that there are real barriers to participation in Canada today, okay, in player development. And you see that at the university level. Baseball is underfunded in Canada. Outside of Ontario, very few universities include baseball as a varsity sport. In the West, the UBC Thunderbirds are a major exception to that. They are a varsity sport there. But in other colleges, students need to play outside of the varsity organization, the varsity system. So it relies on volunteers, it relies on fundraising. And because of this too, there's no national east to west college competition. And UBC plays in a US college league. Okay, now there are smaller colleges in the West that play in BC Alberta College Baseball Conference, not varsity. And then from Ontario East, colleges have what's called the National Tournament, which old theme in baseball is not national. So an easy fix might be to combine those two and then try to get it into U Sports, try to make it a truly national competition at that level, but it doesn't look like that's happening. This also means, too, that our talent goes south. And this is actually an old theme. Since the early days of Major League Baseball dominance, it's been a theme. And there's always been the scouting bias that meant Canadian talent was overlooked. And also each year to this day, now about 1,100 Canadians go to American colleges to play ball every year. So talent drain. Also must be said, baseball is not a top tier varsity sport in most U.S. colleges either. Okay, it is regional there, big in the South, big in the West. The difference being they have thousands of colleges and they have all the minor league teams where the young talent goes. We only have the one. Okay, all right, so there you go. Story in the glory. I want to sum up here just a couple things. Um, Baseball, great history, big part of Canadian identity, especially in small town Canada. And we have this wonderful romantic golden age. But it's always been a regional sport, always more north-south than east-west, never national. And really not uniquely Canadian. Okay? It's part of it's baseball. It's really a shared North American cultural thing, right? It's part of the shared North American cultural identity, baseball. Okay, so that is the story in the glory. Thanks for listening. Now I encourage you to go peruse that attheplate.com website, read about the Lloydminster Meridians or the Regina bone pilers. Not even kidding. Or, you know what, get your nose into one of these W.P. Kinsella books because you'll be really glad that you did. All right, thanks for listening. Hope that lecture was took it home for you. Hope I didn't strike out. And yeah, uh, yeah. Any questions? 100%. Let me know.